Morning, everybody. Happy first day of British summertime and welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's assistant editor, Jason Beattie. Morning, Jason.
Morning, Susie.
Now, this is the People's Pay-Per-View, so get into the comments, ask us your questions, tell us what you think's happening. Those of you listening later on podcast, I'm afraid you're just going to have to move the clocks forward another half hour and pretend it didn't happen. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on an investigation by a campaign group led by donkeys into the top Tories who haven't pushed their clocks forward. They've actually put them back about 30 years and are wallowing in sleaze by hawking themselves out for thousands of pounds an hour to a fake company they hadn't even bothered to check out. Now, more on that later. But first, I want to talk about something more immediately concerning, which is that on April the 1st, just about every household bill you've got is going to jump like someone's shoved paprika up its bum. Now, we are going to be paying more for council tax, water, mobiles, broadband, car tax, prescriptions, even stamps on post that never gets delivered, with some increases going to be as big as 17%. Now, Jason, it says here that it's going to cost the average household £700 a year. Just how are we supposed to sustain that with the year that we've all just had?
Well, people can't, Susie. That's the whole thing, isn't it? And this idea that the kind of the cost of living crisis is somehow over is just not true. I mean, the interesting thing here is they didn't even include other bits of aspects of here because one of the nasties in Jeremy Hunt's budget was this thing called fiscal drag. And that's when you get pulled into a higher tax bracket without even realizing it. So that's coming in as well for an awful lot of people. But the primary concern here is inflation, which was meant to be falling, actually went up last week. Food inflation is running at 18%. And almost every conversation I have, and this is the interesting thing, it's across the board. So it is about people going, have you seen the price of this in a shop? Have you seen how much this has gone up by? And I was thinking about this because I've noticed anecdotally when I go into work, more and more people are eating packed lunches. They're not going out to get sandwiches like they used to. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking we're quite well off. Journalists, we're not badly paid. I mean, not all of them are, but we're earning more than the average income, most of us. And if we're struggling, God knows how tough it is for other people.
Exactly. It's a bit bizarre. I think last time I was in, as the producer Ed says, speak for yourself, Jason. Some of us are freelance. Last time I was in Canary Wharf, I think when I used to work in Canary Wharf, there was a shop downstairs, and I won't mention his name, that used to do fresh meat sandwiches, right, off roasted joints. You know the one I'm talking about. Absolutely delicious. Yeah. And when I used to work there, it was £5 for a sandwich in that shop. And I thought that was too expensive. And it was an absolute treat. Occasionally, I couldn't resist the smell of roast pork and crackling. And I had to go. And I would treat myself maybe once a month to a £5 sandwich. I think last time I was down there, I had a look. And those sandwiches were about £8-9. It was like, who's spending for that? I expect a basket of fish and chips, not a sandwich. But anyway. My roast pork sandwich problems aside, inflation, as you say, is at 10% a month. The cost of the living's through the roof. And a lot of it's being fed by this underlying cost of energy. What a perfect opposite moment for an image of a gas burner. Thank you, Ed. Which, as we all know, has rocketed despite it not costing any extra for the energy providers to actually make, dig or pump this stuff. that we use as fuel. So food costs more 18% more than it did, like you said. Now, Jason, there's a guy in this copy from a bills management website who's saying the government should do more to regulation and actually stamp out the practice of companies doing these annual increases every April. But if the government's refused to regulate the energy firms more heavily to control all these underlying prices in the first place, the chances of them taking a firm hand on this is virtually zero, isn't it?
I mean, the problem with energy is multiple mistakes over many years. So one of the major problems we have is we have a huge number of homes which don't have proper insulation. And yet this government has, well, Cameron famously or infamously said he wants to cut the green crap. And that meant he basically kind of halted all measures to insulate people's homes. Then Johnson came along and came up with his home insulation scheme, which was then cancelled after wasting millions of pounds of public money. I think the National Audit Office looked into it and said, actually, but more money being wasted, being spent on insulating homes. So that's the first problem. We have really badly insulated homes, which means people's bills are more expensive. Then they made it things even worse because we got rid of all our gas storage facilities. Now that sounds kind of rather boring and dull, but actually gas storage meant we could put the gas somewhere. So if prices fluctuated, as they did as a result of the Ukraine war, we had the storage, which meant we could actually, keep prices low. Most other countries invested in gas storage. We got rid of ours twice.
Yeah. Theresa May, as I recall, shut down the last.
It was Michael Fallon,
Rough, wasn't it, off the North Sea.
He did it first in about 2011, when the Tories came in with the coalition, and then Theresa May got rid of the rest of it. So we have no gas storage. So that was the other catastrophic blunder. These are big long-term mistakes we're paying the price for now. And what really makes me so cross is there's no attribution for this. Nobody's gone, this was a really bad decision. Why aren't you being held accountable for it? So
exactly.
So and then you go, yes, the war in Ukraine has made a difference, but we didn't prepare ourselves for this. So that was the third major mistake. We knew this war was coming. Johnson was all gung-ho about supporting the Ukrainians, but did no actual planning for how we would actually cope with this war and its impact on us.
No. What do you think, everybody? Have you got a notification of bills going up? I had one for my mobile and my broadband the other day, suddenly rocketing through the roof. Had the new council tax demand. I've also had one through from the energy company that says it's the price has come down. Hooray, it's 15 quid. Thank you very much. That's going to make a huge difference. That's not going to pay the mobile bill. How do you feel about these increases? What do you think the government should do about them? Are you going to be able to find £700 on April Cruel Day, as it's being called there, to actually get through this every year? And how sustainable is it going to be in the long term? Because they can keep rising prices like this, but eventually people do run out of money if your wages don't go up. So it's not actually something that is infinitely possible. There has to come a point where they're going to start losing customers if they keep raising prices. But we can't all go and get a packed lunch equivalent, can we, for our energy? There's nowhere else we can go to get it cheaper, unfortunately. Now, Mike says, decades of successive, mainly Tory governments selling off every publicly owned facility, utilities, rail, etc. Now these are making billions for others, which could be going into government funds. One interesting point, Jason, before we move on to the main story about the Tory second jobs, is that, the Tory ideology is that if you sell those things off, it makes the system more resilient and more immediately reactive to market pressures. You bring in competition and pure capitalism. But what happened with our gas storage facility in the North Sea, known as Rough, as I think it was, is that we paid the energy company that was running it to mothball it. I think it was Centrica. And then it's actually still there. So at some point now, what's going to happen is we're going to pay them again to reopen it. Yeah. And I don't doubt to start storing the gas when it's incredibly expensive. And we'll find out in a couple of years' time, we're paying the same rate for gas then when it's very cheap as we are now because we started storing it when it was pricey or something.
I want to pick up on Mike Holden's point because he about talking about, the selling off utilities, because actually what's happened is the privatization hasn't made these companies more efficient and made the country more resilient. All it's done is it's made shareholders and executives even richer. And bizarrely and absolutely surprisingly, capitalists like to make capital, and they keep doing it at our expense. So, I mean, if you look at kind of, the kind of water industry, for example, the money hasn't gone in investing in proper sewage works and cleaning up our waters. It's siphoned off the money to in dividends to shareholders, often owned by companies which are actually kind of based overseas.
Yeah.
You take Thames Water, for example, you go through about 7 different companies before you find the ultimate owner of Thames Water, and we're all based overseas. None of that money, which is our money, has gone in actually what it should be doing, which is cleaning up our waters.
No, it gets taken out of the system rather than being put back into the system.
You take the kind of the privatized energy companies. It's not about efficiencies. It's about making as much money as possible. That's how its system works.
Yeah. Now, Anne-Marie says, like Mike, she's echoed Mike's point, really. It started with Thatcher selling off over 50 of our publicly owned assets, and all those billions should be in the public domain and not the offshore bank accounts of the greedy companies and their shareholders. Often, it must be said, not just foreign owned, as Jason said, but owned by foreign states, because they have all kept some state assets and are using it to invest in things and to make money. Which is such a useful and important thing to do if you have a state asset, something we didn't bother doing, it would appear. Now, keep asking your questions, everybody. We're going to move on now to the Tory second jobs scandal. So it's basically 1987 all over again, or 92, whenever it was when the Tory sleaze really started kicking in. So this is the big story of the day, and it's footage that you've probably seen on some of the news channels yesterday of the former Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng. There he is, talking about, well, he was paying in pounds sterling, and he's in his parliamentary office there, Jason, with a bottle of wine and a couple of empty glasses on the shelf behind him, and what looks like a bottle of spirits on the top shelf. And on a great big magnum of something on the right-hand side there behind his head. Oh, dear. There they are. They're talking about... Basically, it's Kwasi Kwarteng and former Health Secretary Matt Hancock hawking, which is so very nearly the right word, themselves to a fake Korean consulting firm for £10,000 a day. Now, there are many people in this country for whom that is the annual salary. But anyway, so Graham Brady, who's the chair of the Backbench 1922 committee with the power of hiring and firing prime ministers, pretty much, he asked for £60,000 a year. And all three offered to take time off from Parliament to visit Korea or hold meetings or fit in this very important second job along with their main one. And Kwarteng actually offered to introduce them to Boris Johnson. And as if who'd want that? I could introduce you to the Honourable Member of Oxbridge and South Ruislip. Whoa, that's worth 10 grand a day to anybody, isn't it? Now, Jason, it's worth pointing out that led by Donkeys, which the campaign group organised all this sting, they contacted 20 MPs by email with the bogus offer of a job for a consulting firm. There's Mr. Hancock talking about the hourly rate, what kind of number he wanted. What were you thinking, Mr. Hancock? We've all wondered that, I'm afraid. And then he gazes into the middle distance and, 1,500, that'll be about right. Like he's doing some sums, like how many minutes it costs for him and his time. Same there for Graham Brady. What's your daily rate in mind at this point in time? Oh, I don't know about a daily rate. I think I want being paid per year, if that's all right with you. It sounds a bit like, a freelancer to be paid per day. But they've contacted 20 MPs with this offer. The rest of the MPs, the other 17, they either didn't respond. They checked out the website and saw that it looked a bit dodgy. They thought, hang on, I've been contacted by a Nigerian prince. Or they just logged off of the call once they got onto it. They smelt a rat, basically. They never took part. So do you think, is this proof that the people who've actually been running the country, who were stupid enough to fall for this sting, are in fact complete donkeys, like it says on the side of the tin?
This is the most amazing thing, because these stings, they do them every 3 or 4 years. Do you remember there was one about 5 years when they got Jack Straw and Malcolm Rifkind? And, there was ones before that. And you go, they must realise, you think, they have half a brain cell, that if somebody's approaching them, offering large amounts of money, it could possibly be a setup. But they don't, Didn't any of them have the kind of nous just to maybe Google this fictitious Korean company? I can't believe it.
I presume the reason they chose a Korean one is that it would come up with loads of Korean results that they wouldn't be able to read or something. But yeah, I mean, 17 of them managed to figure it out.
They do actually have taxpayer-funded researchers working for them. They might want to turn to a researcher and say, this looks a bit dodgy. I've never heard of this company before. Can you just check it out for me before I agree? But no. All they saw was pound signs.
Exactly. The smell of the green, I think, rather overwhelmed the olfactory abilities to smell a rat. Now, Jean says it's time to end the second jobs. We might get decent people that go into politics for some reason other than making money. That would be nice, wouldn't it, Jean? Although I do think we've got to say, considering his tax statements that were published last week, Rishi Sunak is plainly not in it for the money because he makes more sat on his backside than he does actually sat at his desk. So I don't think we can say he's not in it for the cash. He's just in it for the power and the influence. Yeah. What do you think, everybody? What do you think about? I mean, we all know, really. I mean, that's a silly question to ask. What do you think about these MPs asking for this much money a day? Because it is ridiculous. But let's have something more sensible. What is your solution to the problem of second jobs for MPs? Because as Jean says there, they should just ban all second jobs. What about a doctor who is also an MP? What about someone like Rosina Allen-Khan, who goes in and does a shift at A&E as well? You can't ban second jobs in all cases, can you? How do we find a way through it? And let's be fair to these guys. Right? I'm going to try. It's Monday morning. It's 9:19. I'm going to try to be fair to Matt Hancock. They are backbench MPs now. They're not cabinet ministers. They've recently found themselves with an awful lot of time on their hands, Jason. To be fair, they're probably unemployable in other jobs like Lidl or a call centre or a tyre shop, places where you need to actually have some skills, some charm, some basic maths. So if someone rings up a tramp who's asleep under a bridge and offers him 10 grand a day, I mean, he's going to take the call, isn't he? Is any of this really that surprising or that bad?
Susie, I was looking
up. I can't believe I
said that. I was looking up some stats for Matt Hancock's constituency in Suffolk. Yeah, there's 1 in 7 people in that constituency in fuel poverty. In the last decade, yeah, the number of children in poverty in Suffolk has gone up by 26%. There are plenty of issues he, as a constituency MP, could be trying to resolve, could be championing. I can't believe that he hasn't got stacks and stacks of constituency issues, letters, concerns which need dealing with, which he could be dedicating his time to in Parliament. Yeah. And that applies to all the other MPs who take these lobbying consultancy paid work. I do accept it's a difficult area for whether somebody like Rosina Allen-Khan should continue practicing as a doctor. I can understand, for example, why some politicians would want to write pamphlets or books on politics, which I think is totally legitimate. They may even want to write for newspapers for money. I understand that it is about politics. What I think is totally unacceptable is you're paid £84,000 a year to represent people who need help, and some of these people genuinely need the support and kind of intervention of elected representatives to improve people's lives, but they are allowed to get very, very large amounts of money for part-time jobs, which are clearly a distraction and prevent from doing their job properly. It's totally unacceptable. And it comes back from this kind of 18th, 19th century idea, which is why we still have these ridiculous sitting hours in the House of Commons. For example, the House won't sit this afternoon until 2:30, because they saw this as a kind of part-time job, and it should be a full-time job. And most MPs do work very hard, but it's absolutely ridiculous if you talk to Labour MPs, particularly when those in inner city areas where they have so much casework and they don't have enough time to do it, but our MPs out there, like the Geoffrey Coxes, who can make masses of money by doing their legal work at the same time, and it must just feel insulting to them
It's one of those things perhaps where there's a second job that can somehow, or a second source of income, which can somehow enhance your powers as an MP, that can help or continue to be political or continue to represent your constituents doing something, or the kind of second jobs which are plainly just lining your pocket or are nothing to do with your role as an MP. And Mike says, as you mentioned in there's the constituency issue, and Kwasi Kwarteng, it says in the copy, he didn't mention his constituents once in the phone call. So they're talking about when you can take time off, when you could come to Korea, could we have this meeting, blah blah blah. Doesn't mention at any point, I need to be in my constituency on Fridays, or I need to do this, or I need to do that kind of thing.
And that's even before, Susie, we get to the potential conflict of interest.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, because every time you enter in some sort of financial transaction which is outside your normal job, in this case, MPs, you're going to leave yourself liable to a conflict of interest. Because, I mean, you may be able to declare it and you may say above all, but it surely will influence you. If you're being paid whatever it is, 60 grand a year, or in Kwasi's case, even more, this was a negotiation for the lawyers, then that shouldn't be allowed, because if there's any chance or possibility that you could be compromised, that should be stamped out right at the beginning.
Exactly. And it's, as speaking as a self-employed freelance myself, if someone got on the phone and said, I'd like to offer you a job with a consultancy for a lot of money, I'd say, yes, please, thank you very much. But on the call, I would say, who else? Who are you consulting for? This is a Korean consultancy. So tell me it's not Kim Jong-un, please. Who am I getting into bed with? Who else is in the bed, basically? Do I want to deal with you or not? You would ask about your own reputation and how the job with the next person is going to enhance or destroy that. And these guys don't seem to have asked those questions either. Now, Mike says the problem isn't that MPs are greedy and venal. Are you sure? The problem is that Commons, whenever they are asked about second jobs for MPs, rule that it should be allowed, citing the occasional MP who works in the NHS, as I just did. It would be very easy to provide a carve out for some professions and ban consultancies. You could ban some directorships as well, couldn't you? But then you've got perhaps some MPs who are involved in charity work, who are trustees for something. And once you start saying that, say, being a charity trustee is okay, you might find there's workarounds that people start setting up a charity and, I'm a trustee for this charity. And actually the charity is doing the jobs of what used to be a lobbying firm or something. There's going to be ways, if you have that carve out that Mike suggested, people would find a way around that, wouldn't they, Jason?
I think the rules can be tightened up to take into account those factors. This is just them trying to find excuses not to do it because they want to keep their kind of, their snout to the trough. I just don't get it. Yeah. But you can draw up a list of clear exemptions. It wouldn't have to be very long. And for the rest of them, it's all banned. Do your job. Do it full time. Represent your constituents. They need representing.
Yeah. And maybe work 9 o'clock till 5:36, like everybody else in the country. I think that's part of the problem, is that most of us do one job and we find it quite difficult to fit that in with all our other commitments and family and everything else. And we don't really understand how someone else can manage to do 2 or 3 or 4 or even. And it's got to be pointed out, in this particular instance, these aren't second jobs we're talking about. Brady already has 3 other jobs, including being an MP. This would be his 4th job. Kwarteng is a private landlord, which obviously doesn't spend much time doing. He owns a flat that he rents out. But Hancock has obviously already got a second gig as a reality TV star on the go. So it's 3rd, it's 4th jobs in some cases. But then, like I said, we've got a prime minister who earns more in interest from his investments than he does actually as the prime minister. I think we're entitled to ask, aren't we, when they are earning so much from doing other things, which thing is it that's their priority?
Themselves.
Well, you cynic, Jason. Now, Pat says, what does it matter when there's nothing we can do about it till the general election? Even then, if more people don't go and vote, it won't change then. And Pat, don't forget, if you vote this year, photo ID, take your driving license or your passport, because you will need to use it this year in order to vote. Don't go along there, get turned away and then decide you can't be bothered to go back again. Take photo ID this year. Tell everybody, or next time rather. Well, no, it is this year because there's local elections coming up.
Yeah, it's local elections, first time.
You must use photo ID from now on. Do not let your vote get stolen. by that change to the rules. Now, as you can expect, Labour are pretty livid about all this, and at the same time absolutely delighted. So 2 Labour front benchers, Angela Rayner and Tanguy Debonnaire, have written an op-ed in the paper saying how appalling it all is and that a Labour government would ban second jobs and clean all this up. But I think I'm right in saying that Labour are talking about just banning the government from having second jobs, which is the cabinet and some of the junior ministers. As these guys aren't either of those things anymore, under Labour's plans to make it all so much better, exactly the same thing would still happen. These are backbenchers, they're ex-ministers.
They did put it to a vote last year, Susie, Labour, which was for MPs as well as cabinet members, but it was within the limitations we discussed. So it was directorships and consultancies they were trying to ban because they understood that the kind of the NHS workers, the people serving as police officers, etc. But they have tried to push this through.
Right. Okay. Well, hopefully, if they actually get into power, it would get a little bit tighter and tougher. If we get a few more stories like this, I suspect they would have to, wouldn't they? They'd have to start saying it's just banned, and that's that. Frankly, now the argument from the other point of view. Tell me what you think about this, everybody. The argument from the other point of view is that if you ban people who are very good at their jobs and do very good, well-paying jobs, like your barristers, like your Geoffrey Coxes and so on, that means you can, if you have those people in Parliament, you have a greater skill set in Parliament, you have people who have a higher quality of MP. That's the argument for. Right, but unfortunately, the quality of MP that you get is Hancock and Kwarteng and Matt Hancock. I had to say all those words in a line. I can't believe it. That argument, Jason. I'm sorry, I'm actually crying. That argument is just blown apart as soon as you actually look at the people that you have doing the job, doesn't it?
We get their skills when we're elected, and then they still have those skills. They just don't have to keep practicing them when we're MPs. And to take the point here, it's not affecting their first job priorities, but it is affecting their first job priorities. That's the point I keep running home. There are people in Matt Hancock's constituency who need support and help. There is a lot of casework there. There are people who, there's the people on the housing waiting list, the children who can't get the education they need or support for one-to-one tuition. I can go on and on about all the issues which need solving. Yeah, these are full-time jobs, and actually, if MPs spent less time doing second jobs and more focusing on some of their first jobs, it would actually bring out the change we need because the government would have to react to it.
Yeah, and instead of a lot of that casework, it says in the op-ed in the paper there, casework is higher than it's ever been for a lot of MPs because of the cost of living crisis, because there are people being evicted, because there are people losing their jobs, because there are people who can't afford to pay for their bills and having their benefits sanctioned and all this kind of stuff. There is more work for them to do because they get those letters in, they need to write letters to ministers, they need to find things out, they need to go to the Commons Library, they need to represent them in Parliament, they need to give the answer back, they need to try and help and fix all these problems when someone gets caught in the wrong part of the machinery of state. And if you're not doing that, you're not being an MP.
One final point, Susie. If they were working full time, they could actually have more time to scrutinise legislation, as opposed to the kind of hour and a half set aside to look at Rishi Sunak's Windsor framework last week. Or the rather rushing through the illegal immigration bill. They could actually spend more time deliberating properly over the laws which are going to affect our lives. And they always say we've got to rush this through because we haven't got enough time. They have time. They just make them work more.
Yeah, I did see as well, though, that I think it was in Private Eye the other week reported that actually there's so little work in Parliament itself that they're scheduling. People are starting at 2:30 in the afternoon. People are starting later than that and rising at very early in the evening compared to what they used to do, because there isn't enough stuff in the actual schedule to do. And so that's why the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, is allowing a lot of urgent questions and stuff to get tabled, because it's starting to pack out the parliamentary day and look like there's more things happening, because actually there's not enough going on, or certainly not under Boris Johnson. There wasn't enough going on in the House to justify a lot of what they were doing. So, and I suppose it's perhaps the government's fault. Should the government actually just be tabling more legislation and making them work harder?
I think just more deliberation of the legislation which affects our lives is what's needed. These bills get rushed through very quickly nowadays, and without the scrutiny they deserve.
Yeah, well, that'd be nice, wouldn't it? But they're obviously busy talking to Korean consultancies on Zoom. They can't possibly get to Parliament as well. And they've got all that wine to drink in Kwasi Kwarteng's office. Thank you for taking us through all that, Jason. Thank everyone for your questions. Do you have any solutions or fixes for this? Do you think, like our speaker there earlier on, that you don't have a problem with these second jobs? Is it enhancing their role in Parliament? Is it making sure that we get a better quality of MP? I said it again. Or do you really think that this is kind of the problem? The quality of MP we are attracting is not the right kind of MP because they can do these second jobs? Let us know. But first off, there is some good news in the world. We found it for you. Here it is. Now, if you listen to the Conservative Party, the great British public hates all the people coming across the channel in small boats and wants them either to be sunk, shot, or sent to Rwanda. But a survey has found that 58% of us want refugees to have safe routes to travel here. And almost 2/3 are broadly supportive of just the whole idea. I think it's marvellous. Only 22% think that sending people to a country where enemies of the state get disappeared is going to work, because it's not. Now, Jason, do you think, is this proof that the great British public is a bit greater than the current British government?
Undoubtedly. People are always kinder, more sympathetic, more compassionate than the Tories would ever want us to admit.
So why are the Tories doing it then?
You can play on people's fears, or you can play on people's hopes, and Tories always play on people's fears, and there's no need.
It's worked though, hasn't it? And let's be brutally fair, Labour started some of the anti-migrant rhetoric back at the end of their time in power. David Blunkett cut the ability for refugees to actually work while they're waiting for their asylum claims to be processed, which means they go into a detention centre. It means they don't pay tax. It means they become a resentment rather than an assimilation. It's the focus groups and the dog whistle does get people to win votes, doesn't it? I mean, that's how Brexit operated. So,
well, perhaps not looking at this poll. I mean, there's always danger of these things that, by trying to kind of, play to one audience, you offend another. And I think that with the Conservatives, fundamentally the issue for them is that they've got to prove they're going to kind of deliver on their promises. But the other issue is that by kind of trying to demonize refugees and asylum seekers, actually they offend a lot of good thinking people. And as this poll shows, most people are much more compassionate and much more understanding and sympathetic than actually the Tories want to admit.
And a lot of them, of course, aren't necessarily Labour voters. A lot of them can be. I think the Lib Dems are very delighted about the Tories' anti-migrant rhetoric because it's working very well for the Lib Dems in the home counties. Places in the
south. Labour MP for Wigan, who's now shadow levelling up. She told a great story a few years ago, but in her constituency, they wanted to house more than 100 Somalians in a hotel. And they hadn't done any consultation on this. They were just going to kind of dump them there. And Lisa said she understood the concerns of her constituencies. She quickly got together a whole lot of meetings, and she sat down and she explained to them what was happening and why the Somalians needed housing and where they'd come from and the conditions they'd been living under. And she said, once you'd explained, the people of Wigan are incredibly welcoming. And she said they were even saying things like, "Oh, should we go around and kind of bring them food at Christmas?" And Lisa would say, "Well, actually, I'm Muslim, but probably not going to celebrate Christmas." But it was that sort of it, and she said there was no backlash. In fact, people understood because they explained and they consulted and they talked, and I think that kind of that poll bears out the people of Wigan basically.
It does. There used to be a regular column, I think, in one of my teenage girl magazines about fashion, and it was headlined, "Would they wear it in Wigan?" And it's this, isn't it? Exactly. So if think of the same thing works with politics. Would they wear this in Wigan? Yeah, they would if you explained it to them and we're actually reasonable and decent about it, as opposed to blowing a dog whistle. But well done, the great British public. Well done, Jason, for explaining all that to us with so much sympathy and heart. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. We've got to wrap now because we're overrunning a bit. But if you're listening to us in podcast, please leave us a review so other people can find us. We will see you again on Wednesday for another edition of the Tory Sleaze News Agenda. Till then, tatty bye.